Well, firstly, thanks to everybody for joining this morning. Looking forward to this Locklizard presentation. I'm joined by Mark Langton, who heads up the Locklizard business, um, and we're going to talk about compliance to control. Mark is also going to actually tell you what DRM is, which I know is one of the questions which is often raised. So if you'd mind going on to the next slide, please, Mark. So it's a little bit of housekeeping. Everybody on the session will be muted for the session, and you'll be unmuted after Q&A. We are recording this session so that it can be distributed afterwards. If you do have any questions, please enter them into the chat, or you can send them directly to me via the chat, via the direct message. But enjoy it, and we look forward to your participation. And I'll hand over to Mark. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Norman, and thanks everyone for joining. So just to talk through a little bit about DRM, Norman mentioned that one of the common questions we get asked is what actually is the difference between DRM and password protected files. In simple terms, DRM is where you would actually put a set of controls around a document before you actually share that with an individual or a business, and then you maintain control of that document and the viewing and printing aspects of that particular document. Unlike a passworded document, where once the document's been sent, you then have the challenge of how do you share the password. That password, once it gets sent, once the document is opened, the document can then be saved into a different format, and then the document becomes uncontrolled. So DRM is about actually putting encryption controls and ongoing access controls in place for particular sets of documents. Okay, so in terms of the content and sections we're going to cover today, I'll focus this purely as per the subject, which is digital rights, and looking at how digital rights now aligns with certain compliance and regulations. I am mindful there's a lot of compliance and regulations. I've not included all of them. I've just included the main Irish ones. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about why DRM and why now is actually really critical. What can you control? Where and how can you use DRM, and then the conclusions and summary, and of course we got the Q&A session in there as well. So why DRM and why now? Effectively, the world is going digital. Everything's going online. Communication now, it's very, very rare that people actually print documents, even down to things like you get in the post. Where a lot of organizations, whether they're a regulated industry such as insurance, banking, medical, for example, everything is moving to digital. A lot of information is being shared either via email or by other methods such as portals, etc. Limited resources. What do I mean by limited resources? So limited resources are, as the world is moving to green, which absolutely is the right thing to do. We're looking at, chopping down less trees, starting to actually re-look at how we actually share information. So that's what the limited resources piece means. Security, controlling the information that we're actually sharing with others, and rather than just sending generic, open, unencrypted messages that can be shared or intercepted by a third party. I'm looking at the security and controls is becoming ever more important. I will mention NIST a little bit later on in the presentation and how we align to the NIST control, especially the one and two. So identify and protect. $1 billion versus $1 million. If you're a pharmaceutical industry, again, heavily regulated, and you've just designed or developed a new drug, the first pharmaceutical to market is renowned for making billions of dollars from that invention, patenting, etc. If that information was to get into the wild, then you may not be the first. the second or third pharmaceutical that generally brings a similar type of product to the market generally makes millions as opposed to billions. Revenue streams. Businesses are continuing now to be innovative around how can they generate additional revenue streams from existing documents, research, or information that they have, but also not just selling documents and research, but actually looking at how do you reduce cost as well. So looking at the impact of the financial implications of sending stuff in the post or sending information unprotected, or being able to actually charge for that service. And then lastly, which is part of this conversation, is the compliance and regulations that are coming into play. They are vast, and those that are compliance officers will be more than aware of the trying to keep up with where the regulations are going is becoming quite challenging, even down to things like the GDPR process. So looking specifically at the Irish market, I'm not going to read this verbatim, so I'll give everyone just a moment to have a look at this. But essentially, in summary, based on DRM is not just shaped by technological developments, but under the EU regulations, which our Ireland operates in, protection of intellectual property and respect for consumer rights is becoming very, very prevalent. So I'll just give you just a moment to read that, and then I'll move on. Cool. Legal frameworks. Again, looking at the market itself, there are a number of legal frameworks now coming into play around how you protect data, new rights for content creators, platform liability, transparency obligations, technological protection measures. So the Irish framework, which incorporates a digital single market directive, which if anyone's knowledgeable about that, then they'll certainly understand what that means. But it also is around copyright rules, the use of AI, which I'm not going to cover today. I know that there was a previous presenter that covered AI in depth. Is becoming quite a challenge as well in terms of data and information becoming publicly available, and then being copyright infringements, etc. Okay. So the key pieces we're really going to cover today, the copyright and related digital rights, DSM regulations of 2021, GDPR, and where data protection for DRM sits within GDPR, the Digital Services Act, Digital Markets Act, Online Safety and Media Regulation Act of 2022, with the nifty acronym of OSMR. As I said, there's a whole load of others in there as well. And I will mention the NIST now. So if you look at NIST as a cybersecurity framework, you've also got DORA, and a whole raft of other regulations, which again, due to the time today, we're not going to cover all of those in detail. But under NIST, with the identify, the first part of their process is actually looking at a risk management strategy and a risk assessment. That could be down to things like sharing board reports, or sharing confidential or specific data with specific individuals. Then it's looking at stage 2, which is protect. So once you've identified what you're going to do with that highly confidential information, you then need to look at a protective technology as to how you're going to actually manage and control that. We've recently been working with a top 200 legal firm in the US for NDA reasons. Clearly, I'm not allowed to say who they are. They have been sharing information with their clients using password protected PDFs. So they are now investing in a DRM capability, not only for regulatory purposes, but also because, for the reasons I said earlier, password protected PDFs are just not a secure way of actually sharing confidential information. So what are the key provisions pretty much across a lot of these different compliance and regulations are new rights for content creators. So those new rights for content creators are along the lines of enhanced ability for authors and performers to be remunerated through the content and the work that they create, not to have that content and work taken, stolen, used inappropriately, whether knowingly or unknowingly. So it's about actually allowing those content creators to have their information protected. Primarily that sits within the music and video industries, which everyone will be familiar with. However, the areas that we're talking about today around documents and sharing those documents using digital rights management. Platform liability. Again, if you are sharing information, how do you share that information? How do you actually share that online content? What is classed as being a fair and reasonable way of actually licensing the content that you're sharing? These are all things that form part of the regulatory requirements. This is under the DSM regulations of 2021. Transparency obligations, being open about how you are going to share information, not actually also pushing technology onto clients. And that's one of the things that businesses do need to consider when they're looking at a technology, which is you can't force your clients or your customers to use a particular technology by imposing them having to install applications, modules, software. So it's certainly a consideration around how are you going to share that. Then the technological protection measures. What actually can you and can't you control with a DRM capability? So I'll cover that a little bit later on. So again, looking specifically at the Irish market around leveraging DRM technologies, the businesses are required to ensure that they encrypt data, they manage licenses to protect financial information, but they also comply with copyright law. Now, that's really quite key. I do have a range of documentation that backs up this information, which I'll be happy to share with the team at Renaissance, and in turn, that can be shared with the people attending this session. So looking at the regulations, which I say I've touched on those sort of quite lightly because there are many of them, and there's many directives. This session was about regulated industries. Well, it actually goes beyond the regulated industries. So predominantly most regulated industries are the finance, federal government, legal industries, etc. But it really covers all organizations that are actually have a requirement or have anything that's confidential or have a need to share confidential information that's controlled, measured with third parties. Document sharing. I'm sure everybody probably on this session has received something that they've actually thought, well, that's quite interesting. I've seen stuff published on LinkedIn that's not protected, and also in addition to data being shared as a good example for compliance. Then one of the big areas that we're working with organizations on currently is around the Security Operations Center and CERT policies and frameworks within an organization. So this isn't only about sharing documents with external companies or individuals. This is also about looking at your own internal policies as well. So on the basis of most organizations will have a CERT program, so computer emergency response. The that document is normally an open document sitting on a server or in a folder that a number of people will have access to. However, can you imagine if the cyber criminals managed to get hold of that document and they were actually 6 steps ahead of you in terms of your CERT process or your instant response process? So just looking at things like protecting those internal confidential documents is highly important. Intellectual property. I'm not going to read this verbatim, and then of course regulatory compliance, which we talked about too. Big challenge that you have with DRM, if you look at traditional DRM or the days before DRM really came into being for document protection, a lot of people are familiar with PKI, public key infrastructure, which is where you would actually share, you would have a public key and a private key. You would share those with the person that, or one part of that you were working with, that you wanted to share information. The problem you've got there is that's a very manual process. It's very one-to-one. It's very difficult to administer. But now with the production and the development of enterprise-wide DRM technology, then that management can be automated. It can be manual still, but it makes it much, much simpler, and the controls and metrics become much more concise, which also helps to meet those regulatory compliance requirements. Things that again people should be looking at, and we've covered on a couple of these already, is the encryption protocols. With the advent of the new wave of quantum computing coming to the market, 128K very soon will not be able to cut the requirements of organizations. So 256-bit is the standard that you should be looking at to ensure that there's no unauthorized access by any third parties. And I'm sure that 256 will also change over time as well as AI and other systems become more sophisticated. Key management, we've already talked about making that simple and straightforward. And in protection against threats such as hacking, etc. So one of the things that we quite often ask companies is, where do you store your crown jewels? And how do you protect those crown jewels, and how do you ensure that only the right people have the right access at the right time? And then not only that, but how do you also revoke the access to those documents, whether they're internal or external? So DRM landscape, if you look at the growth drivers, as I talked about earlier, the industry is moving towards going green, but also being able to share much more content digitally. The marketplace currently, to give you an idea, the growth over the next 5 years is predicted to be around $15.2 billion, and the compound annual growth rate is around 40%. It's extensive, and we are finding more and more clients are now wising up to DRM or digital rights management and looking at ways in which they can innovate and use the technology, as I said, to either generate a revenue stream or to ensure that they protect their internal assets to meet those regulatory requirements. But also to stave off those cyber threats as the cyber criminals are getting more and more sophisticated, and quantum computing and AI is starting to move into the space. So technical key challenges. So the technical adoption or adaptation. A lot of people are not aware that there are enterprise grade DRM technologies available. A lot of the challenges that most organizations face is scalability. So when looking at DRM capability, not only do you need to look at your frameworks and decide what it is you actually want to protect, you then need to determine how you want to protect it, and then you need to look at the volume of how you're going to protect that content and make sure that it's manageable, either, as I said, through automation or through a manual process, or being able to manage and control that information. Cloud integration is becoming more and more prolific, but also you have capabilities within certain organizations. And one of the things that Locklizard does is that we actually offer an own server implementation of our technology, where it will actually reside in your own environment. We don't have any access to that environment at all. It's completely within your control. And that's why we have organizations like the Secret Service, NASA, the US Air Force, and a couple of the three-letter US agencies that actually use our technology, amongst a number of other organizations in the UK and other parts of the globe. So the conclusion is DRM innovation, businesses shouldn't just be thinking about DRM. Businesses need to actually really start embracing DRM, understanding the DRM market, and understanding how they can utilize DRM to actually enhance what they're doing as an organization, but also to ensure that they are protecting their valuable assets. Product selection. There are a number of DRM providers on the market now. Some some scalable, some not so scalable. Again, as with all technology investments, it's about really understanding and knowing what you need before you actually make that decision. And then also looking at the strategic market position. What's actually, how can you use the technology to enable you to share digital content, add the levels of protection, but also have that as an automated process. So, as a sort of final comment, we've got the Irish and EU legal frameworks are about adopting best practices and staying abreast of technological and regulatory requirements and developments, so you can foster trust. Trust is really easily broken from organizations or from customers. So building trust is really key. Making sure that you provide innovation, but without forcing technology onto your customers or your internal teams, and also looking at sustainable growth, which is how the Irish market is currently being looked at for digital content.
Thanks,
Norman,
Mark. Yep,
that's yep, that wraps me up.
perfect. Yeah, thank you very much. Um, Very interesting. I shared, a little story with you earlier on as well. A couple of years back, a large company in Ireland, obviously that I won't name, um, their CTO was in negotiation on a very large deal, and they knew who the competition was, and they'd had some communications with the competition before. But anyway, they'd sent out their final proposal, with password on it. That was the level of protection. Um, and they thought they'd sent it to this particular individual. However, Outlook is great at autofilling, and they sent it out to the competitor. They then went ahead and tried to withdraw, and I don't know if you ever get a request to withdraw an email. If you weren't going to look at it before, you're going to look at it now. And obviously, they didn't get the opportunity to withdraw it, but the competition got the full information that they required. It just goes to show you that anybody can make that kind of a level of mistake, and it's extremely dangerous. I certainly, hands up, I've done it in the past as well, sent stuff like that. So that was very interesting. A couple of questions have arisen. One was, could you talk through the DRM market and what's driving the business to rethink how they share content?
Yeah, absolutely. The so there was traditional. If we go back in time, a lot of document sharing was carried out through password protected. Just putting a password on a document, whether it was an Excel document, a Word document, a PDF, for example. But then there's been a prevalent growth of tools on the market. A number of them are free of charge, and you send someone that's what you think is a secure document. Only they're going to read it. You'd like to think they would own it, rather than sharing it. But you can get a password cracking tool off the web, which you can remove a password from a PDF in about 5 seconds. That then becomes an uncontrolled document. The market then, and this goes back a long time, by the way. I mean, Locklizard was formed in 2004, but going further back than when Locklizard was created, you had PKI, public key infrastructure. And public key infrastructure was where you would actually have a one-to-one relationship, and you would be able to encrypt a document. So you'd put encryption around it. You would then receive that document. You would then use your key. You would right click the document, open it, and then you would have the unprotected document on your device. And I'm going to go back to, you've now got an unprotected document that the publisher or the person who sent it to you now has zero control over what you can now do with that document. So whether you want to print it, whether you want to forward it to someone, whether you want to publish it online, whether you want to screen share it, etc., you've still got an uncontrolled document. So DRM, the growth of DRM, which has taken a while to be fair, is down to organizations are realizing that even using PKI, where you encrypt a document, once it's been unencrypted, it's now not able to be managed. So the DRM has added, if you like, the PKI with steroids. It still uses essentially PKI technology in the background. But what it does, it puts a lot more controls around the document. So, for example, when we encrypt, which this might make it slightly easier, then I'll talk a little bit more about the market growth. So, if we encrypt we take a PDF file and we then convert that file into what we call a PDC, a portable document container, completely proprietary to Locklizard. Nobody else has a PDC file extension. That particular document, the PDF, by the way, remains untouched. We take a digital forensic, like a forensics copy of it, convert it. The original remains untouched, so you still have that locally in your environment. The PDC file, when it's then shared with somebody, it has a range of metrics and controls around it. So, for example, you can't print it. You can only print it once. Do you want to validate that the person who's looking at the document is actually approved to look at that document? The way that we manage it is that we create a unique identifier for every secure document, and every customer has a unique identifier as well. And we tie the two together. And we actually say, is that customer with that identification number allowed to see this document with this ID number? How many times are allowed to see it? So even if that client has that document locally on their device, two things. One, they need a proprietary viewer to view it if it's held locally. Secondly, they need a license to be able to view it. Thirdly, you as the publisher, and the term publisher is generic, by the way, anybody that uses a DRM platform, whether you're a bank, a book publisher, a legal firm, you're actually classed as the publisher. You have infinite control over that document. So at any time you can revoke that customer having access to that document, or you can change the specifics of how that document can actually be used. Um, why has that grown? Why has the market grown significantly, and why are Gartner now starting to take about 2 or 3 years ago, Gartner started taking a huge interest in the digital rights management space? There's been so many data leaks, and I don't want to do the FUD of data breaches, etc., but there's been an awful lot of data leaks, data breaches, intellectual property being taken, um, research information being abused, AI, people copying and stealing other people's work, etc. The market is now really starting to surge. There's been an uplift in the number of vendors that are looking to provide DRM. We're not the only player on the planet, but we have been doing this since 2004. I'll give you an idea of the growth. We get in excess of 400 inquiries per month. We don't do any marketing. We have a website, and we've got, as I said, an enviable range of clients. But what we are finding is that a lot of clients are saying, this is digital rights. I don't want a cloud-based service. I actually want everything to be on-prem. So it goes a little bit against the people moving everything to cloud. So that's why we have this offer of being able to put everything on-prem. If you look at Middle East and Africa, they're really, really hot on data sovereignty, and they want everything to stay in their kingdom. So we can do that. But also there's the monetizing side of it. A lot of companies are now looking at how can we actually monetize the data and the research we've got, or how do we reduce cost by not sending stuff in the post, by actually sending things to clients or customers digitally, and knowing that only that customer can actually see, view, print, control, or do whatever with the document.
That's perfect. And as far as I understand, if they do print it, there's a watermark you can put on it as well, Mark, isn't that right?
Yeah, correct. And again, good point, Norman. There's two things that we can't stop. So we can stop screen sharing. We can stop. So the person who tries to screen share, the other person just gets a black screen. However, cameras, phone cameras, we can't stop someone taking a photograph of a screen. But we normally recommend that you enforce watermarks on to the document. So that controls that. The same with printing. If you allow someone to print a document and it doesn't have a watermark on it, you've now got an uncontrolled document that they could then scan, save under a different file format. But if it has watermarks embedded in it that says highly confidential, not for distribution, it's got the person's name, their email address, all sorts of stuff, then they are less likely to abuse it. So reality is nothing's perfect, but absolutely enforcing watermarks and the ability to not screen share is really key. Just sorry, building on that, another question that comes up, and I mentioned just now about having a proprietary viewer to see the document if it's held locally. There is also an option to look at the document remotely through a web browser. But the individual can't ever hold the document locally if the web browser option is the only option that's available to them. And again, watermarks are enforced on that.
Lovely, thanks, Mark. There's also a question here where they're saying, what should be the key considerations when researching for a DRM solution?
Well, the first one is what encryption level is the DRM provider actually using? Because if it's 128 bit, then that's going to go out of sync really quickly. Also need to look at the how does well actually let me backtrack slightly. The first thing you need to decide is how critical is the information that you're sharing? What would be the impact of that data getting out in the wild? So that's the first thing you need to look at, because if it's well, it's not really a problem, then you can look for a slightly different solution. You then need to decide what scale you want to operate at. So how do you want to share the documents, but actually how many people or customers do you want to share them with? So as a good example to that, and again, where the own server, which is absolutely something you should look at. Do you want to hold everything internally, as in the complete platform, or are you comfortable having that hosted remotely on a SaaS or an AWS or whatever IBM platform? The scalability is really key. Most DRM vendors don't scale particularly well. We have examples where we have 240,000 simultaneous logins taking place for an education authority in the US. And we handle that without any difficulty at all. The other consideration, and there's lots of considerations, but I'm trying to sort of pick on the main ones. So it's security encryption being used, scalability, ease of use of the platform. The last one is, does the DRM vendor ask you to send your unprotected document to their remote server, then they encrypt it and send it back to you? That's We don't do that. The way that we do it, and we are unique in the way we do this, we do everything locally on the device. You never send an unencrypted document across the internet to our server. Everything stays locally in your environment. So I say those are the four main considerations.
Yeah, and they absolutely all make sense. So there's just a last one here. We could ask, what is DRM and how does it differ from sharing a password? I think you may have already discussed this somewhat, but maybe expand upon it a little bit, Mark.
Yeah, so just going back to really what I said earlier, password protected files are not secure. And the challenge you have is you send someone the document, and then we all like to think we're being creative and we send them the password on a WhatsApp because we've emailed them the document. We think that's safe. We send them a password on a WhatsApp or a text message, or even some cases people put I've seen it where people have sent a file and they put the password on the same email as the file. Once the password's entered, the document's not protected. you don't have any ongoing control of that information. Again, exactly the same with PKI. As I said earlier, once the person at the far end has actually unencrypted the document, opened it, holds it locally, it's an unencrypted. It's an open public document. That's the main difference. So DRM is not only do you set the criteria for which your customer can view or control or open that document, you also set the ongoing access to that document as well, and about what they can actually do to it. At any point, you can revoke access. So memberships, you can build membership business where someone pays an annual subscription, and if they don't renew their subscription, you can revoke access to all of their documents instantly. So that's the key difference between DRM is at the time and ongoing management and control of the document and what happens to it, who can see it and what they can do with it.
Perfect. Yeah, I laughed because yesterday I was sitting at an event and I got two emails from the same person. The first email was Excel file with password protection on it, and the second email was the password.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there you go. That is what happens. I mean, from your perspective, Norman, you run Cyber Expo Ireland, and there
Mm.
are a lot of very senior people that attend those sessions. You then have your sponsors who, if the attendee has agreed under GDPR that they're happy for their information to be included with any of those vendors, when you send that Excel document out to those sponsors, how do you know that they're not? So one of the sponsors team decides to leave and go to another company, and they take that Excel document with them. Well, they've
Mm.
still probably got access to it. Whereas if you DRM'd it and they forwarded it to themselves, they would never be able to open it
Yep. No,
because they
absolutely.
need a number of things to be able to do so. So it's even down to that. And when I talked about GDPR earlier, that's one of the criteria of GDPR and why DRM sits into the GDPR arena, because that individual forwarding that Excel list of attendees to a personal email address or to another company they might be going to, that is a GDPR breach.
100%. And that's why we use Locklizard to send that information out, Mark.
Exactly.
Um, I don't know if anybody else has any questions they'd like to raise. I give you a minute or two to consider. But in the meantime, Mark, I found that interesting. And if anybody requires any information, please reach out to us. We're happy to assist. We can show you the platform and answer any further questions that you might have. I don't see anything coming up in the chat at the moment, so I think we probably bring it to an end, Mark. And thank you again for a very interesting discussion, and thank you everybody for attending. And enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, Mark. You want to
And
say?
brilliant. I'll send you over those documents as well, Norman, the ones that reference the Irish marketplace, if they're of interest to people. It's not War and Peace. It's about 6, 7 pages. And I want to say thank you as well. And thank you to Renaissance for inviting me to do this. I genuinely do trust this was of benefit to the people that took time to attend. And I want to say a big thank you to them as well.